Swan Lake playing on every television screen, tank treads grinding concrete in Red Square, an empire of 270 million people hanging by a thread. Moscow, August 20th, 1991, 11 in the evening. You're watching the final 24 hours of a superpower's last desperate breath. 3 young men will die in a tunnel. 8 conspirators will flee like rats. One moment will decide whether 7 decades of Soviet power survives or crumbles to dust. If you value documented Cold War history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the timeline of the 1991 Soviet coup attempt published in Wikipedia, which draws from official Soviet and Russian state archives, and the eyewitness accounts documented by the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute from their August 1991 coup analysis archive. Now back to the information. 23 hours and 59 minutes before collapse, General Nikolai Kalinin, Moscow Military District Commander, declares curfew from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., effective immediately. 4,000 soldiers, 350 tanks, 300 armored personnel carriers, 420 trucks positioned around the capital. The State Committee for the State of Emergency, GKCHP in Russian, controls every broadcast, every newspaper, every phone line. Vice President Gennady Yanayev sits in the Kremlin declaring Mikhail Gorbachev too sick to govern. Defense Minister Dmitry Yazov commands the tanks. KGB Chief Vladimir Khrushchev controls the secret police. Premier Valentin Pavlov holds the economic levers. 8 men against 270 million. The White House glows under floodlights. Not Washington, Moscow. The Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic's Parliament building, where Boris Yeltsin barricaded himself 39 hours ago. Tens of thousands of defenders surround the structure. Trolley buses flipped sideways, street cleaning machines welded together. Concrete slabs dragged from construction sites. A ring of bodies and metal protecting the only legitimate government left standing. Midnight passes. August 21st begins. 23 hours, 59 minutes to go. Outside the parliament, Major Evdokimov from the Tamanskaya division turns his tanks away from the building. Symbolic. Defection. The turrets point toward the street, not the parliament. Yeltsin climbed on one of these tanks 43 hours earlier. But the image went global. Inside the building, General Konstantin Kobets commands the defense headquarters. Former Soviet army officer, now defending against his former comrades. He has no heavy weapons, no artillery, just determination and 10,000 unarmed civilians forming human chains. 12:40 a.m. First reports filter through underground radio networks. 3 locations under immediate threat. The tunnel system beneath Kalinin Prospect, now New Arbat Street. The Garden Ring access routes. The embankment approaches to the parliament. Intelligence suggests coordinated assault planned for 2 a.m. The GKHP wants this finished before dawn, before the world wakes up to watch. 1 a.m. sharp. The tunnel beneath Kalinin Prospect becomes a killing ground. Captain Sergei Surovikin, future general, future commander of Russian forces in Ukraine 31 years later, leads a column of Taman Guards infantry fighting vehicles through the underpass. The defenders saw them coming. Trolley buses blocking the roadway. Street cleaning machines creating a bottleneck. The crowd refuses to move. 3 men step forward. Dmitry Komar, 22 years old, Soviet-Afghan war veteran, knows what combat looks like, covers the observation slit of a moving infantry fighting vehicle with his body, shot twice, crushed under the treads, still fighting. Vladimir Usov, 37 years old, economist, runs toward Komar to help. Stray bullet catches him in the chest, falls beside the burning vehicle, dies trying to save a stranger. Ilya Khrushchevsky, 28 years old, architect, designed buildings, not battles, shot dead as troops pull back. The crowd sets fire to the infantry fighting vehicle. Smoke and screams echo through the tunnel. 3 bodies in the concrete. The price of freedom measured in blood. 1:31 a.m. Army fails to break the barricades. The tunnel holds. Word spreads through the parliament. 3 dead. The first martyrs. Their names whispered through the halls. Komar, Usov, Khrushchevsky. 2:21 a.m. Civilians form human chains in front of the White House. Arrest warrant issued for Boris Yeltsin. Too late. The momentum has shifted. Each death hardens resistance. Each shot fired costs the GKCHP legitimacy they can't afford to lose. Dawn breaks gray over Moscow. 6 a.m. 8 hours, 39 minutes remaining. The parliament still stands free. Some tanks defect to Yeltsin's side. Not many. Enough. The conspirators lose nerve. Defense Minister Yazov begins having second thoughts. Premier Pavlov claims illness, a convenient excuse to distance himself from failure. The circle of 8 conspirators cracks. 7 a.m. Radio Liberty broadcasts reach the parliament defenders. Foreign governments condemn the coup. President George H.W. Bush refuses to recognize the emergency committee. The Soviet Union's international legitimacy crumbles in real time. The empire that dominated half the world for 7 decades cannot control its own capital for 72 hours. 9:20 a.m. General strike begins in Latvia. The Baltic republics smell blood in the water. Estonia already declared independence restoration the night before at 11:10 p.m. The dominoes start falling while Moscow burns. 11:50 a.m. Mikhail Gorbachev refuses to return to Moscow at the coup leader's behest. Still under house arrest in his Crimean dacha, still defiant, Yeltsin refuses to travel to Crimea to negotiate. No compromise, no surrender. Winner takes everything. Noon approaches. The critical hour. 1300 hours. Military time, 1 p.m. civilian time. Uzbekistan's President Islam Karimov declares the State Committee's actions illegal, threatens to leave the Communist Party. The Union fractures, not just Moscow, the entire Soviet structure disintegrating by the hour. 13:15. The coup leaders flee Moscow. 34 minutes after Karimov's declaration, 8 men who controlled nuclear weapons and the world's largest army run like criminals. No dramatic last stand, no final battle for the Kremlin. They grab briefcases and drive toward airports. Cowardice masquerading as strategy. 13:29. The Russian parliament gives Yeltsin mandate to arrest the coup leaders. Official authorization for what everyone knows is already over. The victors writing the legal framework for what the people won in the streets. 13:39. Military commanders agree to pull all troops from Moscow. Not ordered, they agree. The chain of command collapsed. Soldiers refusing orders, generals switching sides. An army that once terrified NATO cannot control 3 city blocks. 14:59. Coup leaders escape to Crimea, the same peninsula where they held Gorbachev prisoner. Irony writes itself. The hunters become the hunted in the exact same location. 15:20. Ministry of Defense announces all troops pulled back to bases. Official surrender. 4,000 soldiers. 350 tanks. 600 armored vehicles, all withdrawing in defeat. Not from foreign invaders, from their own citizens armed with nothing but conviction. 16:15. The Supreme Soviet's Defense Committee declares the emergency over. Parliamentary language for total victory. The coup that aimed to save the Soviet Union instead triggers its final collapse. 1700 hours. Soviet troops pull out of Lithuania. Press censorship lifted. The information war lost completely. No controlling the narrative when tanks retreat and civilians advance. 1814. The Supreme Soviet announces Gorbachev as president of the Soviet Union again. Too late. The title means nothing now. Real power shifted to Yeltsin's Russian Federation. The Soviet president returns to rule over ruins. 1830. Gorbachev leaves Crimea. Flying back to a Moscow he no longer controls. The man who brought glasnost and perestroika returning to witness their ultimate victory. And his own irrelevance. 1919. President Bush talks with Gorbachev by telephone. International recognition of the obvious. The coup failed. Democracy survived. The empire shattered. 2013. Gorbachev officially rules the Soviet Union again. On paper, reality tells a different story. Boris Yeltsin commands the loyalty of the Russian military, the Russian parliament, the Russian people. Gorbachev rules nothing but fading memories. The final hours dissolve into aftermath. Interior Minister Boris Pugo and his wife are found dead in their apartment. Murder-suicide rather than face justice. The other conspirators arrested within 48 hours. All later granted amnesty by the State Duma in 1994. All except General Varenikov, who demanded trial continuation and won acquittal. 24 August 1991. 3 days after the tunnel killings, thousands attend the funeral of Dmitry Komar, Vladimir Usov, and Ilya Khrushchevsky. Gorbachev posthumously awards them Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor of a state that no longer exists. Their bodies rest in Vagankovsky Cemetery. Their monument stands over the tunnel where they died. 3 names in bronze paint on gray marble. That same night, another symbol falls, the Felix Dzerzhinsky statue outside KGB headquarters at Lubyanka Square. Dismantled by crane while crowds cheer. The founder of the Soviet secret police toppled from his pedestal. The architecture of fear brought down by the same hands that defended the White House. Gorbachev resigns as Communist Party General Secretary. Vladimir Ivashko replaces him briefly. Then resigns when the Supreme Soviet suspends party activities throughout the Soviet Union. 74 years of communist rule ended not by foreign invasion or nuclear war, but by 3 men dying in a tunnel and 8 conspirators losing their nerve. Ukraine declares independence on August 24th. Belarus follows on August 25th. Moldova on August 27th. The domino effect accelerates. By December, 11 republics signed the Alma-Ata Protocol, creating the Commonwealth of Independent States. Gorbachev resigns as Soviet president on December 25th. The Soviet Union officially dissolves. The hammer and sickle flag lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. 72 hours that changed everything. Not the years of Cold War tensions, not the nuclear standoffs or proxy wars. 3 summer days in Moscow when ordinary citizens faced down tanks and won. When an empire that survived world wars and revolutions crumbled because 8 conspirators couldn't shoot their own people in broad daylight. The story behind the Tunnel Massacre reveals the complete breakdown of Soviet command structure. Captain Sergei Surovikin received orders to clear the barricade by any means necessary. His battalion carried live ammunition, standard operating procedure for crowd control since the Tbilisi massacre in April 1989. 47 people died there. Baku followed in January 1990, 137 killed. Vilnius in January 1991, 14 dead. The pattern established. Soviet troops would fire on civilians when ordered, but Moscow was different. These weren't Georgian nationalists or Lithuanian separatists. These were Russians defending Russians. Surovikin's own soldiers hesitated. Radio intercepts captured that night reveal conversations between tank crews and their families in the crowd. "Mother, get back. Please. Uncle Dmitri, why are you here?" The human cost of civil war playing out in real time. The 3 bodies changed everything. Word spread through underground networks faster than official communications. Memorial Society activists, the same group that exposed Stalin's mass graves, distributed photocopied death notices within hours. Underground printing presses in basement apartments. Samizdat networks that survived 7 decades of censorship, now serving democracy instead of dissidents. Boris Yeltsin himself descended to the tunnel at 4:30 a.m., knelt beside the bodies, asked their relatives for forgiveness. "I could not save them," he whispered to Vladimir Usov's wife, the moment captured on forbidden cameras. The footage smuggled to Western news agencies through diplomatic pouches. CNN broadcast it 6 hours later. The world watched a future president weeping over martyrs in a concrete tunnel. The GKCHP's final military card was the Airborne Forces, VDV paratroops. Elite units commanded by General Pavel Grachev. 25,000 soldiers trained for rapid deployment anywhere in the Soviet Union. These weren't conscripts or tank crews with divided loyalties. Professional killers loyal to the state above all else. General Grachev received direct orders from Defense Minister Yazov at 2:15 a.m. Storm the White House, arrest all occupants, use maximum force. The paratroopers loaded into helicopters at Tushino Airfield, 12 Mi-8 transport helicopters, 144 combat troops, enough firepower to level the parliament building. The helicopters never took off. Grachev later revealed the conversation that saved Russian democracy. His deputy, Colonel Alexander Lebed, confronted him in the hangar. "Pavel Sergeyevich, we swore an oath to the people, not to 8 conspirators in suits." Lebed had fought in Afghanistan, knew what urban warfare looked like, knew the White House assault would require killing thousands of civilians to reach the parliament members inside. And I cannot give that order to Russian boys," Grachev told investigators years later. Afghans were one thing, Russians defending their government? Impossible. The helicopters sat empty while democracy survived by one general's conscience. The coup's nuclear dimension reveals how close the world came to catastrophe. At 8 a.m. on August 21st, the Soviet General Staff ordered the Chigit Briefcase, Nuclear Command Authority, returned to Moscow immediately. For 60 hours, nobody controlled Soviet nuclear weapons. Not Gorbachev, isolated in Crimea. Not the GKCHP, focused on tanks and parliaments. Not Yeltsin, commanding only Russian conventional forces. Air Force Commander Yevgeny Shaposhnikov later admitted Soviet nuclear commanders received contradictory orders throughout the crisis. Some missiles targeted American cities remained on hair-trigger alert. Others received stand-down orders from competing authorities, strategic rocket forces. Commander Yuri Maximov refused all launch orders from anyone during the coup. "I will not start World War III over Moscow politics," he radioed to his deputy commanders. The international response exposed the coup's complete isolation. President Bush suspended all economic aid within 12 hours. British Prime Minister John Major recalled the ambassador. German Chancellor Helmut Kohl cut short his Austrian vacation and returned to Bonn for emergency meetings. The group of 7 industrial nations issued a joint statement condemning the illegal seizure of power. More damaging than diplomatic protests was the economic panic. The London gold market opened with Soviet bullion selling at 15% discount. Currency traders dumped rubles faster than during the worst moments of perestroika. Oil futures spiked on fears of Soviet supply disruption. Within 18 hours, The coup cost the Soviet treasury an estimated $2 billion in capital flight and commodity losses. The GKHP tried controlling information but failed completely. Voice of America broadcasts reached Moscow despite jamming attempts. BBC World Service maintained contact with parliament defenders through shortwave radio. Radio Liberty, broadcasting from Munich, provided real-time updates that Soviet media couldn't match. The information war lost before it began. Underground networks proved unstoppable. Fax machines in every major Moscow office copied and distributed opposition leaflets. Personal computers, still rare but present in universities and research institutes, printed hundreds of thousands of appeal documents. Young activists used early mobile phone networks to coordinate resistance. Technology that didn't exist during previous Soviet crackdowns now served democracy. The provincial response revealed the coup's shallow support. Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, saw massive demonstrations led by Mayor Anatoly Sobchak. Over 100,000 people filled Palace Square by noon on August 20th. Sverdlovsk miners began striking immediately. Miners in the Kuzbass coal fields walked out en masse, the same workers who built Soviet industrial power now dismantling it. But significant support existed too. Azerbaijan's leadership backed the GKHP completely. Tajikistan's Communist Party endorsed the emergency committee. Uzbekistan wavered until Islam Karimov's last-minute switch. Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan hedged their positions, waiting to see winners and losers. The Soviet Union's death throes played out differently across 15 republics. The conspirators' personal collapse accelerated the political breakdown. Gennady Yanayev's hands shook visibly during the August 19th press conference. His slurred speech sparked rumors of alcoholism or a medical crisis. Defense Minister Yazov contradicted himself multiple times, claiming both health reasons and state necessity for deposing Gorbachev. KGB Chief Khrushchev disappeared completely after August 20th, leaving subordinates to improvise policy. Premier Valentin Pavlov's illness on August 20th was actually a nervous breakdown. Witnesses described him weeping in his office, unable to sign documents or take phone calls. The man responsible for Soviet economic policy reduced to hysteria within 36 hours of seizing power. His deputy ministers began ignoring orders and making independent decisions. Interior Minister Boris Pugo's suicide note, discovered after his death on August 22nd, revealed the conspiracy's true desperation. We believed we were saving the motherland. Instead, we destroyed it. History will judge us as traitors to everything we swore to protect. I cannot live with this shame. The military aftermath transformed the entire Soviet defense structure. Over 40 general officers faced investigation for coup participation. 15 received criminal charges. 3 committed suicide rather than face trial. The Defense Ministry purged hundreds of field-grade officers suspected of supporting the emergency committee. An institution that survived Hitler's invasion couldn't survive 3 days of internal political crisis. The KGB faced complete reorganization. Thousands of agents transferred to other agencies or forced into early retirement. The organization that terrorized Soviet citizens for 7 decades lost credibility overnight. New Russian security services emerged from the wreckage, but the mystique of state omnipotence died in that Moscow tunnel with 3 civilians. International intelligence agencies scrambled to understand the implications. CIA estimates suggested Soviet nuclear weapons remained secure despite command confusion. British MI6 reported widespread demoralization among Soviet diplomatic staff worldwide. French intelligence documented massive document destruction at Soviet embassies across Europe as diplomats prepared for regime change. The economic consequences extended far beyond immediate market panic. Soviet foreign debt obligations became murky with unclear governmental authority. International contracts worth billions of dollars faced legal challenges. Joint ventures between Western companies and Soviet enterprises suspended operations, pending political clarification. The world's second-largest economy froze in bureaucratic paralysis. Regional power structures collapsed in a domino effect that accelerated through autumn. Ukraine's independence declaration on August 24th triggered immediate Western recognition. Belarus followed within days. The Baltic states achieved United Nations membership by September. Each departure reduced Moscow's authority over remaining territories. The nuclear weapons situation created the largest proliferation crisis in history. Ukraine inherited over 1,700 strategic warheads. Kazakhstan controlled over 1,000. Belarus possessed several hundred. 4 nuclear powers emerged from one empire's collapse. American negotiators worked frantically to maintain centralized control over weapons of mass destruction. Cultural symbols matter as much as political ones. The Dzerzhinsky statue removal on August 24th night drew massive crowds to Lubyanka Square. Sledgehammers and crowbars dismantled the bronze founder of Soviet terror, pieces distributed as souvenirs. The pedestal stands empty today, a concrete reminder of institutions that seemed permanent until they weren't. The Memorial Society documented over 40,000 participants in White House defense during the 72-hour crisis. Students, professors, factory workers, artists, pensioners, dies, veterans. No single demographic dominated. Democracy defended by the entire spectrum of Soviet society united against authoritarian restoration. The Soviet archives revealed the GKCHP planned mass arrests beginning August 35th. Over 15,000 names on detention lists. Journalists, intellectuals, religious leaders, ethnic minority activists, economic reformers. A return to Stalinist terror prevented only by the conspiracy's rapid collapse. The lists survived in KGB files, evidence of how close the Soviet Union came to internal genocide. Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze's August 20th speech at the White House proved prophetic. This is not about politics or economics. This is about whether human beings can live as human beings or return to being property of the state. The man who helped end the Cold War understood the stakes completely. Classical musician Mstislav Rostropovich flew from Paris to Moscow on August 19th, specifically to join the White House defense. The world-famous cellist performed impromptu concerts on the barricades. Music and freedom belong together, he told reporters while artillery shells echoed in the distance. Art serving democracy when democracy needed artists most. The three martyrs' backgrounds reveal the human dimension of political transformation. Dmitry Komar served in Afghanistan from 1986 to 1988, survived combat against Mujahideen fighters, only to die defending Russian democracy from Russian tanks. Vladimir Usov worked as an economist for the State Planning Committee, the same bureaucracy implementing market reforms that threatened his job, chose principle over personal security. Ilya Krichevsky designed residential buildings for ordinary Soviet citizens, applied architectural precision to barricade construction, then died protecting his own handiwork. Today, Captain Sergei Surovikin, the man who commanded the vehicles that killed 3 defenders in that tunnel, serves as a general in the Russian army. The infantry fighting vehicle that crushed Dmitry Komar and shot Vladimir Usov was manufactured by the same defense plants that build tanks for modern conflicts. The GKCHP members who escaped to Crimea in August 1991 died natural deaths as pensioners. The democracy they tried to destroy outlived them all, though not in the form those 3 young men died defending. The tunnel monument stands over the spot where the Soviet Union's last breath escaped through concrete and steel. 3 names in fading bronze paint. A weathered Russian flag on a stubby pole. Traffic rushes overhead while Moscow lives and works and forgets. History compressed into 24 hours when ordinary people faced extraordinary choices, and the choices they made changed everything.